Hello guys and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're having a look at a new 5-man that's just been opened for testing on the 7.3 PTR, which is the seat of the Triumvirate.
So yes, this is a new 4-boss instance which seems to take place on some floating islands in the space between Argus and Azeroth. The instance itself comprises of multiple open areas, each with a boss, and they're all connected to one another in a linear way. Also along the path as you travel through the instance, you'll be occasionally accompanied by Illyria Windrunner, which is awesome. Probably.
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't even know who she is. Either way, as you zone in, you start on some floating platforms and you get to see a close-up of the planet Argus in front of you. And if you turn around, you can see Azeroth behind you. There is also this really strange looking 2D art thing that seems to show like a large sprawling Draenei city on multiple like disjointed islands. We guess it's a placeholder or maybe something that they're testing. To be honest, I hope it's one of those things because it looks garbage, not gonna lie. And the rest of the instance looks really nice, so yeah, it looks really off. Either way, you jump down from those starter platforms to the first main area, and you really do need to be careful as you jump across these platforms because if you fall down, you will die. Now the first area you'll be working through is a large oval-shaped arena-style section surrounded by broken and decayed Draenei-style buildings and architecture. The entire area is also filled with this purple void energy that's like seeping through the cracks in the floor, some of which is tainting nearby trees and plants. And of course, the whole place is jam-packed with trash.
You'll be fighting off subjugators, which have the new ethereal model, which looks absolutely awesome. These guys don't really do too much, they just apply debuffs to your tank that reduce the healing they take, and debuffs to the raid, which simply makes them do ticking damage to anyone within their circle whenever they move. So while you have the debuff, you just have to stand still. On top of this, you'll also have some famished broken mobs. These guys apply even more debuffs to the tank, and they channel consume essence, which is essentially an interruptible drain life. You'll also have small packs of void discharge blobs. These again just apply even more stacking dots to the tank, and they also explode shortly after they die, so you need to make sure that you don't stand within the swirly circle as they begin to die off. After killing your way through that first set of trash, you'll very quickly realise that you've reached the first boss, and you'll need to defeat the 4 subjugators that are channeling into him before you can start the encounter.
Now the first boss is Zarul the Ascended, and he's quite a simple boss, yet his mechanics are pretty interesting. He'll face a random player and cast Null Palm at them, which essentially is just a frontal shockwave that just deals a small amount of shadow damage. We'd have found spreading out around the boss was pretty useful so that only one player got hit by it. One of his major abilities is Decimate. This is a fairly large hit on the tank which causes a huge pool of this void sludge to appear on the ground. When you stand within the pool, you'll be taking ever-increasing ticking damage, and if the boss stands within the pool, he'll gain 100% damage buff, so you need to make sure you drag him out of it. At the same time, multiple void blob adds will spawn around the room and start moving towards the boss, and if they reach him, they'll explode and deal a ton of damage to the group, so you need to kill them quickly. On Mythic, these adds also leave even more void sludge on the ground, so it's just another reason to kill the adds as soon as you can. Now his most interesting mechanic is Umbra Shift. He'll cast this at a random player and it will knock that player backwards into the Void Realm. Whilst they're in this Void Realm, they'll gain an alternate energy bar and they'll be able to see a bunch of small dark aberration adds. Killing these adds will cause them to explode, dealing damage to you if you are close enough, whilst also adding 10 energy to the bar. It's not entirely clear if that energy giving mechanic is proximity based, so we're not sure if you need to stand right on top of them as you kill them. Either way, you do need to go around and kill these adds to fill up the bar, and once this is done, you'll gain an extra action button to leave the realm. This will stun the boss for 20 seconds, and during this stun, he'll be taking a ton of extra damage, so you can very quickly burst him down. Now while that player gets to have fun within the realm, the boss will actually no longer cast his Decimate, the big goo on the ground, or his Shockwave, and instead he'll start fixating random players and chase them down. When you are fixated, you do need to kite the boss, which isn't particularly difficult because his movement speed has been reduced. Now his melee attacks during this time were supposed to knock you back, but that wasn't working properly all of the time, and generally this mechanic seemed pretty buggy. There were times where you would stun him, but the stun debuff didn't show to everyone properly, and then he'd randomly become taunt immune. We also had the Shadow Realm adds randomly phase into the normal realm as well, so yeah, this entire boss was a little bit funky.
So just PTR stuff, basically.
Yeah, pretty much PTR.
Either way, once you've managed to kill off the boss, you follow Illyria Windrunner into a room where she starts channeling some energy onto a wall, which causes a giant hole to appear in it, and then you can continue into the second half of the instance, which once again is absolutely packed with a shit ton of trash. Now most of the trash is either the same as the previous area, or has mechanics which can be summarized as basically don't stand in the bad. None of it is really all that interesting, so we're not really going to go over it too much. Your objective at this point is actually to fight your way towards a rift and then deactivate it by killing the nearby rift warden. While the rifts are active, they'll frequently send out a bunch of bolts towards you which do a lot of damage, but are also kind of annoying because they spawn even more trash. Now, as you are killing off the Rift Warden, it's really important that you interrupt the fear that he casts, otherwise you are going to be feared and just pull even more mobs, and once you have killed him off, another rift will then appear. While moving over towards the next rifts to go and deactivate them, you can actually go inside these giant void sinkholes, and all they do is just pull you towards the center of them. If you stand in the middle of them, you gain a stacking dot, and if you allow it to stack to 10, you'll gain a permanent dot that is only removed when you die. Interestingly, if you have this dot when you kill the last boss, you actually gain an achievement, so have fun with that one. But once you've messed around with going inside sinkholes and destroying rifts and pulling ridiculous amounts of trash because you didn't interrupt the fear, you'll finally get to fight the next boss, which is Saprish.
Now Saprish will be accompanied by his 2 pets, and all 3 of these mobs share a health pool. Now let's have a look at Saprish first. Now he'll be placing several traps on the ground, and if you move into them, you'll be stunned for 5 seconds, so you want to avoid them as much as possible. Occasionally, Saprish will cause all of the traps on the ground to explode, dealing damage to anyone within their very small explosion circles. So as long as really you stay away from the traps, you'll be absolutely fine. Towards the end of the fight, there are quite a lot of them, so if you want, you can use immunity such as AMS or Aspect of the Turtles to run around and clear up the traps, but if you cleared enough trash, you're not really running out of space. Apart from also dealing small bursts of damage to random players, Saprish actually has a buff called Hunter's Rush. This buff causes his melee attacks to potentially deal extra damage, and it seems like the higher the stacks he has, the higher the chance he'll do all that extra damage to the tank. Now Saprish will be gaining these stacks through his pet's abilities, as well as the last ability he'll cast, which is Umbral Flanking. When he casts this, he'll mark a couple of players and then dash between them in a similar way to how the second boss in Blackrook Hold does. For each target that he hits, he'll do a little bit of damage to them, but he'll gain a stack of Hunter's Rush. So we're not entirely sure if you can dodge the attack if you are marked, but it seems that you just want to minimize the amount of players that are hit and probably just let the marked players take the damage. If the boss does accidentally gain a bunch of stacks, you really don't need to worry, as it seems that they do drop off over time anyway. Moving on to his 2 pets. Now the Dark Fang Cat will jump around to random players and then do a series of frontal cleave attacks at their location, similar to the spider boss in Archway. You want to make sure that you move out of them, as each hit leaves a pretty nasty stacking dot on you, but it also gives a stack of Hunter's Rush to the boss. Now the Duskwing Bat will occasionally swoop down at the location of a random player and cast Dread Screech. This cast will do a burst of damage to the group, but also disorient everyone for 4 seconds. You really need to interrupt this cast, as the group-wide CC can easily get out of hand as you mindlessly wander into a trap or 2, meaning you could be locked out for over 9 seconds, or you could have the Dark Fang Cat leap at you and apply a bunch of nasty dots that you can't avoid because, you can't move out of it, so make sure you interrupt this cast. But honestly, that's it for this boss. It's pretty much just interrupt the bat and move out of anything that looks bad. And one strange thing we found with this boss was his movement speed. It was just really, really slow. Like our Death Knight tank could easily permanently kite the boss around if he wanted to. We guess this isn't intended and he'll get a bit faster for live.
So after finishing the boss off, you'll continue along the path past some really cool looking void infused trees, and you'll have to deal with even more ethereal and void trash. Some of it which applies a new debuff to you, which causes you to act like a black hole as you suck other players towards you, which is pretty cool. At the end of the path, you'll jump down into another area where you'll see the third boss, which is Viceroy Meza. You want to make sure that you clear all the trash in this particular area, because you need the entire room when it comes down to the encounter.
Immediately upon pulling the boss, a ring of shadow will spawn around the room and slowly close in throughout the fight. Standing in this shadow will do a large amount of ticking damage to you, so you need to kill the boss before the entire space is filled up with this poorly animated goo. Now Nazar will be spam casting Dark Blast at the tank. This was interruptible, but you really want to be saving your interrupts for other abilities, such as when he spawns his tentacles. He'll spawn 4 of these at a time, and each of them will channel into a player, applying a stacking dot which also reduces the healing you receive by 5% per stack. The tentacles need to be killed quickly, and you should be using your interrupts and CCs just to stop their channels. That being said, you need to make sure that somebody saves at least 1 interrupt for when the boss casts Howling Dark, because this will just fear everybody for 4 seconds. This fear isn't just annoying because of course you can't do anything during it, but you could also end up running into the goo around the edges of the room, which could easily kill you, especially if you're doing it on a high Mythic Plus key. On top of this, the boss will also channel Entropic Force. This is an uninterruptible channel that will deal ticking damage and push everybody back. This pushback gets stronger over time and its strength doesn't change depending on where you stand. So you just need to be as close to the boss as you can, and then as soon as the channel starts, everyone needs to run against the pushback to avoid being placed in the goo around the edges of the room. Now you may have noticed that Nazar has an insanity bar which passively fills up over time. Once it reaches 100%, he'll summon 2 shadow guards, which will cause the boss to go immune. The boss will then start to cast Eternal Twilight, which will just one-shot the group if the cast goes through, so you need to kill off the shadow guards and then interrupt the boss, and as soon as that is done, his energy will reset and the fight will just repeat from there. Now in the dungeon journal it does mention that his other abilities should become empowered at certain insanity thresholds, with his Dark Blast dealing more damage at 33% and his tentacles becoming unkillable at 66%. This is either bugged and not working, or it's since been scrapped, and really it's probably best that it is a scrapped idea, as the boss is already pretty busy without having to deal with permanent tentacles around the room.
So once you've got the hang of the boss and you've managed to kill him off, Illyria Windrunner will then just conveniently appear again a little bit too late, but she will come and open up the door to the final boss room, which is an awesome void-infused tomb area with 2 rift wardens inside it. These wardens are holding up rifts which spawn voidlings. When the voidlings die, they spawn some goo on the ground which empowers the wardens, so it's really important that you move the wardens away from it, otherwise you're going to take a shit ton of damage. While killing off the wardens, it's important that you also interrupt their Stygian Blast, otherwise you're going to be feared all over the place. After you kill both the wardens off, you'll then get to fight the final boss, which is Lura. During the beginning of the fight, you mainly just deal with adds, and then you need to burst down the boss before the incoming damage gets out of control. This is because Lura will be dealing ticking damage to the entire group, and each time it ticks, the boss gains a 5% damage increase, and this just stacks forever. So eventually the ticking damage just becomes completely unhealable, and people will start to die. Aside from this, the boss will just be spamming Void Blast at the tank, which just deals a small amount of damage. As soon as you pull the boss, the portal will open up, and your good old friend a Greater Rift Warden will appear. The Warden needs to be killed to remove the portal, which is spawning a bunch of waning Void Adds. These small Void Adds will spawn a large patch of goo on the ground when they die, so you want to kill off the Warden before too many patches spawn. The main thing that the Warden does is cast Fragment of Despair, which will mark an area of the room and throw a bolt towards it. If the bolt hits the ground, it will deal a huge burst of damage to the entire group, very likely one-shotting you if you're on a high Mythic Plus key. However, if someone stands within the bolt landing location, the bolt would just do a small amount of damage to that player, and no one else will take any damage whatsoever. So you need to make sure that you have a single player ready to soak the bolt to reduce the incoming damage on the group. Once you killed off the Warden and the Void Adds, the boss will then become stunned with Backlash, which causes it to take 200% more damage, while also resetting all the damage increase buffs that it gained over that time. After the stun has ended, 2 portals will now spawn, so you'll now need to deal with 2 Greater Rift Wardens and 2 Fragments of Despair and twice the amount of adds. Once you kill off both Wardens and all the little remaining adds, the boss will then become stunned with Backlash again. After this Backlash is over, no more portals will spawn, and you'll just need to kill the boss off as soon as you possibly can. The boss will now just cast Grand Shift, which will just move all patches of goo to the location of random players. As the goo lands on top of you, it deals a huge amount of damage, so you need to make sure that you move from it. We found that stacking up and moving around as a group worked really well, but you can easily just move around by yourself and dodge things just fine. So as you can tell at this point, as the boss starts getting higher stacks, starts dealing more ticking damage to the group, as well as just throwing these patches of goo all over the place, it's pretty much a race to the finish. You just need to kill the boss before the healer can no longer keep up. And that's pretty much just the instance. Once you kill the boss off, Illyria Windrunner just sort of disappears, and then you're just locked in this final room.
You can't even leave.
Yeah, you're just left here to rot.
Which is a pretty grim way of ending the instance. But either way, let's give some feedback like we always do. What do we think of the instance?
So to start off, I mean, obviously, apart from the very start of the instance with the skybox and the 2D textures, it looks absolutely terrible.
Garbage.
Everything else looks fantastic. I really like the aesthetic of the instance. I really like the void theme, the way that the void is coming out the grounds, and that it's actually an effect as well, that you can stand in it and it does do ticking damage. I think that's really, really cool. I also like the way that the instance is laid out, although it is linear. It's kind of like Eye of Ashara in a way. There's a lot of trash absolutely everywhere, but you're not forced to do any of it. You can choose your path. Yeah,
which might lead to some like interesting choices if you have like a crazy AoE team or more of like a single target team, or you could maybe do some crazy stealth shenanigans if you wanted to. It could lead to like loads of Mythic Plus options for this instance. One thing that does concern me a little bit is the amount, well, not necessarily the amount of RP, but the length of the RP that's there. Like after the first boss, when you go in the room, You have to walk all the way down there. She's talking loads of garbage.
That's like 30 seconds.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, that's quite neat maybe for a first run through if you like all that kind of stuff. But when you're on a high-end Mythic Plus key, you're like, let's go. You're up against the timer. It's really difficult. And it happens after the third boss as well. You're like, oh my god, just open the fucking door. But moving on to the bosses in here, although, yeah, they're kind of buggy and not always working, which is to be expected. It's PTR, and it's the first time this place is being tested. I really like them. I think they got like great potential. Like talking about the first boss, there is actually quite a lot of individual responsibility, whether it is kiting the boss, although that wasn't particularly working, or when you're downstairs trying to collect all the ads and kill them off to get the energy to stun the boss. I thought that was like quite a neat thing, especially for a first boss. Sometimes they're quite dull. You know, like they
can be, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like, oh, whatever, it's the first boss. But no. And then you get to stun him as well. Like all of these, well, you've got the first boss and the fourth boss, which both have these huge windows where they take an extremely high amount of damage, which you don't normally get in a 5-man, let alone twice in the same instance. So on Mythic Plus, maybe you'll be going into the boss's vault, your cooldowns up, maybe you'll be using them on trash and then waiting and trying to align it so when you leave the realm, everyone has their cooldowns up and they can absolutely annihilate the boss super quick. So that's kind of neat. You know, you get to like choose when the boss is going to absolutely melt.
Yeah, I mean, you could align it just for CDs.
Yeah, if you wanted to.
If someone's inside on 90% energy, people could say, wait 5 seconds, when CDs are coming up. You know, you can work that stuff out. So that's pretty cool. You know, there are windows where you can create all these potential strategies, especially with the first boss, like you said. But overall, I'd say that the bosses are kind of well made. There's nothing that's really new and flashy.
No,
there's nothing spectacular. I mean, of course, in the last 5-man that they released, you know, you had the shield mechanics at the end, I guess, was kind of a new thing. Whereas this one doesn't actually bring anything necessarily unique. But the mechanics they have brought, they work well with all the bosses. They are copy-paste mechanics, but they're good. Yeah, it works well.
The bosses are still fun to fight against. Like, personally, I think the second boss is like a nice breath of fresh air as someone who plays Shadow Priest a lot, because we haven't had like a council-style fight in a 5-man. And I think
the second boss.
Yeah, the second boss in there. So it's nice to be able to go into a fight as a multi-dotter and, you know, feel that you're not just whoring on things that you're multi-dotting. Instead, everything's like worth dealing damage to, which is awesome because, you know, I think Shadow Priest and 5-mans could probably do with all the help that they could get. But talking about high-end Mythic Plus, I can see that the third boss and maybe even the fourth boss could potentially be very vicious on Tyrannical. Because the ring eventually collapses in on you on the third boss, there is kind of like a tight damage check. Maybe it stops after a certain amount of time. Maybe they need to implement a stop if you're going in there with like maybe a lower damage group. And then the fourth boss is really going to test your healers. If it is on Tyrannical and he's doing a shit ton of damage to the entire group, let's just hope that they scale it in such a way that this isn't a Cathedral 2.0. Let's just say that.
I think everyone's thinking that. But just to wrap it up, I'd say overall that there is a lot of trash, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, providing that they actually set the percentage so it's fair. I mean, if they expect you to clear the entire place, absolutely no one is going to do this.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty
They really should stick to the sort of Eye of Ashara style theme where there's mobs everywhere, but you only need to kill, say, 10% of them to actually make the timer. That will work well in this instance. And also, like you said, you know, potentially reducing that RP or giving you the option to just cancel it would be absolutely fantastic. And overall, the bosses, although there are bugs that obviously need to be fixed, they're in a pretty decent position as they are. You know, just the wireframe of them is perfectly fine. But it is a slight shame that maybe there isn't anything that's necessarily unique that's been added. But overall, it's a good dungeon, and I'm quite looking forward to doing it on Mythic Plus once those bosses are finally fixed. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this dungeon preview, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. And before we do go, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. We really do appreciate your continued support. If you'd like to join this group of people, a link for that is in the description. And we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.